You're listening to Stellar Success, Leveling Up for Medical Pros with Dr. Tudor Francu. Join us as we explore how medical professionals can achieve stellar success in all areas of life. It's time to level up.
Hi, everyone. We're back at Stellar Success Podcast. I'm your host, again, Dr. Tudor Francu, and I have a great guest tonight with a lot of wisdom and experience, Dr. Arthur Lazarus from North Carolina. How are you, Doc?
I'm doing great. Thank you for inviting me. I appreciate it.
Sure. It's a pleasure. Dr. Lazarus, how would you describe your why in this life?
If I would have been more prepared, I probably would have gotten out Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. To me, that describes the why of life. Let me translate it to personal terms, though. I mean, my why of life is about family. I'm trying to remember the quote, though. Is that it's not? I'm going to botch it, but I'm going to try and paraphrase it. There's a line in there, and actually, it's not attributed to Frankl. It's another philosopher, Nietzsche, who said something like, "It's if you don't have uh, um, a why in life, you don't have a how in life." And I know that that's incorrect, but you can Google that, and Google Nietzsche, and that's a very famous line that he had. But I guess the point is, when all is said and done, the why in life is about relationships, and of course that extends beyond family to medicine. Um, I'll immediately, because you mentioned it just prior to us coming on, that this could be somewhat introspective, and I don't know if you meant that, quite frankly, as that's the nature of your podcast, or because I'm a psychiatrist that it might be more introspective compared to podcasts that you have with your other guests. In any case, the legend goes, and we'll come to another German, not a philosopher, but the father of psychiatry, Sigmund Freud. Legend goes that he was asked what makes a successful person, or what makes a healthy person. He didn't really differentiate, because when you think about it, success and health are, correlated, not 100%, but there is a correlation in many cases. But he said that a successful person, or a psychologically healthy person, was one who could love and work. And so I think I just said that, in a different way when I talked about family relationships and medicine. And by the way, years later, the other thing is, no one could really attribute that to Freud. I mean, his works, they've pored over his works, and they can't really find that. But still, like many people who are saddled, or I should say, raised uplifted by famous quotes, they can't really attribute them to that individual. This is one such case. But years later, someone added, it's not only love and work, it's play. That's what makes a successful and psychologically healthy individual, someone who could love, work, and play. And I think it's only been recently, over the past decade, and certainly since COVID, that we've come to relish the play. Because for many physicians, when you say it's work and love, it was one and the same. They were married to their work, right? And we'll go to Russia for this one. Anton Chekhov, who by training was a physician, but became perhaps the greatest short story writer of all time, had another pithy statement in this genre where we're kind of at right now, where we're talking about. And again, I'm paraphrasing, and it was something like I have two loves in life, my wife and my writing. And if I get tired at bedtime with one of them, I can turn to the other. Again, I'm paraphrasing, but so that's a long-winded answer to your question. And I was about to say that we've, since COVID, we've begun to value the play side much more than ever. and through the generations, compared to when I was trained, which was, medical school in the late 70s, residency in the early 80s, compared to today's generations, and with all due respect, by the way, this is not a put down of any type. This is real. I think they're probably in many ways wiser than we are, but they talk about work-life balance. I never, we never used that term, 30, 40 years ago. But so achieving work-life balance is also not a measure of success, but a way to success. And of course, there's an opposite side to that coin, which is that the dying breed of doctors who worked 100 hours plus a week, from the baby boomer generation, don't quite subscribe to that philosophy. But we're clearly witnessing a transition away from that. So that's kind of my general thoughts about success in life. And one other thing I'll say, it's not so much the material things either. It's the intangible qualities about oneself that are very important. In my career, I was an academician first and foremost, and when I left practice, I worked in the pharmaceutical industry. So I did a lot of academically oriented, writing for research papers, clinical trials, et cetera. But then over the last, I say 5 years or so, I took to writing, in the narrative tradition, the field of narrative medicine. And I've told this story before, but it's worth repeating. My son, who is a writer, he's a poet, but he teaches, creative writing at a university. When I had some downtime during COVID, he said, Dad, why don't you write your autobiography? And I said to him, Josh, no, but I don't read autobiographies. I don't find them particularly interesting. I'd rather read something on Wikipedia about a person if I want to research them real quick, but to read a whole book, it's kind of boring for me. And I'm not even a star. No one wants to read my autobiography. But what that led to was a series of books where I shared a lot of my clinical vignettes and stories with usually a take-home message to it. And so I have several books are written along those lines. And each a lot of those stories appeared online, like at Kevin MD or MedPage Today or Doximity. And I have them all in several 2 to 3 inch, 3-ring binders. And I said to my wife, when I'm going, make sure that the kids, divvy up the articles between the kids, or maybe one of them wants or whatever, or something like that. And she looked at me and she said, nobody wants your articles. Nobody wants your books. She said, they just will remember you for who you were, and right now they relate to you for who you are and their memories of growing up and their interactions with you. So I think, if you can hold that type of intangible presence, not only for your own family, but again, colleagues, friends, et cetera, that's really a good, yardstick measure of success.
Yeah, I think your answer was longer, but I was very well placed, and I think you encapsulated in this answer several things that I wanted to touch on. So I think I'm going to go back to a few of them. The fact that you said, at least at the end, that the real value of success is how you are perceived by someone next to you, and how your memories are for others. Because the reality is, like you said, we're gonna be forgotten after we're not here. And after the first generation, probably nobody's gonna know who you are, what you did. Nobody's gonna be interested in that. But the people next to you are gonna remember you the way you were, like you said, and the memories that you made with them and how you made them feel, the impact that you had around people around you. That's the value of your success, finally. I love how you said that. So let's go back a little bit towards your own self, and with your experience and with your wisdom so far from your career, and all the stories that you're talking about clinically, I'm sure there are things that didn't go well, and things that, they're not necessarily failures, but were bumps in the road. Can you give us an example of such things that you encounter in your life and practice that kind of pushed you forward even more?
I can give you reams of those types of stories, and I'll be quick and give you maybe one or two. But um, I don't know of a physician who doesn't have skeletons in the closet or bumps in the road. By the way, as an afterthought, though, before I forget it, I know we finished that previous segment, but one good way to sum it up, I think, is again someone who once, a very famous person, it may have been Maya Angelou, but I'm not sure if it was her, but someone said, people don't people may not remember what you did for them, but they'll remember how you made them feel. And that's a thumbs up one. So bumps in the
Absolutely.
road. Um, I mean, every beginning, I'm not going to take you back to like a grade school. I could, but I won't. And I don't know how far back you want me to go. I mean, the first major bump in the road was not getting into medical school. My first try. Um, so we didn't use the word resilience back then, but that's basically what it called for. And I did get in my second go round. But how I dealt with it was there's a universal word, at least, well, it's universal in my ethnicity, but other people have heard the term chutzpah. And I had the chutzpah to call a physician who interviewed me. I had a couple of interviews at medical schools. As I said, I was rejected roundly by all of them. But I called one of the docs who had actually interviewed me because he was on the admissions committee. He was a psychiatrist, and I don't remember my essay very well, but I remember it was kind of tinged, as you can imagine, with psychological concepts. I was a psych major as an undergrad too. Um, and he was a psychiatrist. He related to my essay, but he said, frankly, you've got to bring up your GPA and your MCATs. Um, and he said, I'll tell you what. And so I'm from Philadelphia originally, born and raised. Spent most of my career and life there. Um, and so I was in Philly, and this was a Philadelphia medical school. And so he said, why don't you come over Saturday and we'll have coffee and talk about it? I mean, now, an incredible, show of compassion, to have a stranger, who calls at talk about a cold call. And he invites me over and we talk. And that's when he told me about the MCAS and so forth. And in my gap year, which we didn't call it back then, but in my gap year, I did exactly what he suggested. I took some courses. Hooray for Stanley Kaplan. I took a Stanley Kaplan course and did exactly what I needed to do. And I got into, Temple Medical School is what I'm referring to. So, but that was the first bump in the road. And then I had a lot of others. Most of them were in a professional sphere, not my personal life. I'll give you one more because it really set the tone for how my career unfolded. And this was toward the end of my first year of psychiatric residency. And I was on call for a 500-bed hospital, Temple Hospital. And it was about midnight when I got the call, and the resident working the emergency department wanted some advice about a patient who was having hallucinations, quote unquote, hearing voices. And she wanted to know what an appropriate dosage of Haldol would be. He was on X dosage, and what could she increase it to? And I told her, and I said, would you like me to come down and see him? I wasn't overly enthusiastic about coming down at midnight to do an evaluation, but she said, no, Dr. Lazarus, not necessary. So I said, all right, well, then increase it to 20 milligrams or whatever. And I said, and I said, make sure he makes an appointment for our outpatient clinic. And that was at midnight. And then at 3 a.m., the same first year resident calls me back and says, oh, Dr. Lazarus, do you remember that patient that we discussed with the Haldol? I said, sure. Well, the paramedics just brought him in. He just jumped from the third story of his boarding home, and he's alive, but his legs are in bad shape, and they took him off to surgery. And I was crushed by that. I felt that was a personal failure. I actually became very, traumatized and depressed. I kind of blamed myself for not seeing him, even though I wasn't asked to. And so that led to kind of a lot of symptoms over the year of anxiety, depression, PTSD. I still think about the incident 40 years later every springtime, which is when it happened in April. And that put me on a path of having a lot of anxiety around patient outcomes, especially in psychiatry. I mean, you can't control ultimately if someone's going to attempt suicide, or whatever actions they take, or if they injure someone or whatever. You ultimately can't control that. And anxiety really is a form of wanting to be in control and not being in control. So I didn't think psychiatry was going to be a good long-term fit for me. Um, and that eventually but at the same time, I was also becoming more deeply interested in what today we call population health. I was beginning to get bored anyway. Within 5 to 10 years of my residency, I was becoming bored of one-to-one clinical practice. And so um, I actually was more interested, in outcomes and best practices, and we didn't call it evidence-based treatment back then, but we do now, which led me to leave clinical medicine to work first in the health insurance industry, and then, as I mentioned later, in the pharmaceutical industry. And so, it's also put me on a pathway. I wrote about this incident that I just told you about. I think I wrote about it was published. I published it in the Pharos, which is the journal for the AOA, Medical Honor Society, and I got a lot of really good responses to it, mainly from physicians who had been traumatized in one way or another, indirectly. What we call vicarious traumatization, that they were a witness to a trauma. But PTSD is rampant in the medical profession. We don't
Yeah, this
necessarily
is
talk about it, but I'll stop there. That was a huge. I'd call that more than a bump in the road. That was more like an earthquake in my career.
yeah, I totally understand that, and I think I want to stop here for a little bit because this is an important subject for the audience in general, and the medical professionals are those people that encounter a lot of mental issues in their career, the burnout, the inability to get out of the situations they're in because of their constraints. And like you said, mental health is one of those things that you cannot predict. You break your leg, you kind of predict what's going to happen. And we all know the treatment. You have an injury on your skin, or, something happens to your body. We kind of know how to treat that, how long it's going to take, what's the outcome. It's very predictable. But when it comes to mental health, like you said, something we don't know. And we don't we don't know what we don't know. That's the point. Because patients slip, patient crack, patient, go into a state that we cannot predict. And that's like in your case, that's heartbreaking sometimes. And I can relate this to medical professionals because there are a lot of them that end up in that kind of situation, and they either don't look for help, they don't know how to look for help, or they don't want to look for help. And I think you can probably advise maybe some of them that are in this kind of situations what the first thing they should do is if they have this kind of problems.
Are you a busy medical professional striving to excel in life and work? Stellar Success Podcast brings you the habits and insights of top leaders in medicine and beyond. Discover strategies for balance, growth, and fulfillment in every episode. Follow us on Instagram at Stellar Success Podcast for daily inspiration. Start your journey to success today. Subscribe to the YouTube channel now.
In your opinion?
Well, they have to protect their mental health first and foremost. It's the same thing when they have a family crisis. You have to tend to your family. It's always family first. But when it's a personal mental health crisis, whether it's burnout, depression, trauma, you have to try and get straight first. If not, you can't really engage, in practice in a meaningful way, and your own outcomes, patient outcomes, will suffer. And so, however you choose to get help, whether it's through coaching, through a mentor, through a mental health professional, including up to taking, meds if necessary. You have to, focus all of your energy and efforts on your well-being, even if it entails a leave of absence. Um, you have to take care of number one. It's just, and I know that, docs are, loath to do that because they're afraid that it could become public, that licensing, and accreditation types of agencies might, put their nose under the tent and look at that stuff and ask for it on questionnaires. But they're gradually moving away from that. That's been a positive change over the last several years, and the AMA has been instrumental in getting various organizations to stop probing the mental health of physicians. And really, it should just come down to one question, which is that, do you have any kind of, a mental or physical impairment that interferes with your ability to do the job? That's the only question that and if it's yes, explain and what you're doing, in terms of receiving treatment and help for it. Basically,
I
it comes
think
down to the
it's
fact
very
that
widespread
we're no
issue in
different than.
healthcare.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I think it's a very widespread issue in healthcare right now, and it's one of those iceberg issues. You only see the tip of the problem, but the rest of them are buried underground, and people don't want to talk about them because of this sense of embarrassment sometimes that they face for the community, for their patients, for their families. And it's not only for human medicine. I think it's, dentists have the same issues, veterinarians have the same issues. I think it's one of those things that people totally underestimate.
I for some reason, well, the reason being just, being a psychiatrist, I may have left. I tell people, I may have left like academia, but academia never left me. I may have left psychiatry, but psychiatry never technically left me. I relate to all walks of life, and it's very easy for some reason people kind of like when we're, face to face, they'll just start to like confide in me without my even telling them that I'm a psychiatrist. And several years ago, I took one of our cats, I think, to a veterinarian. I could tell she had a little bit of a, depressive look to her, but I didn't really say anything. And I don't know how, but within a couple of minutes, she was telling me she was depressed and was having suicidal ideation as a veterinarian. And they have a high rate of, professional suicide as well. So I have a way of drawing out not only on that end of the spectrum, but the other end of the spectrum. I was with my son, who I mentioned earlier, and he lives in Honolulu, and we were in an area of town where there were a lot of homeless people. And somehow my eyes locked onto one of these people, and he started to wave a bologna sandwich at me or something of that nature, and started saying something that was unintelligible, but like I just locked onto him and he locked onto me, and there must have been a sixth sense at work. So even if someone is psychotic or depressed or suicidal, they, I can relate to all of them, and they in turn see something about me that they want to, say something. And the very first words uttered to me by a psychiatric patient when I was doing my junior clerkship in a state hospital, as I unlocked the door to the ward with a skeleton key, a short woman came out of her room as I began to walk into the ward, and she looked at me and she said, "Hey, Mr. DJ, are you the postman?" And verbatim, as the first, and I always thought I wanted to go into psychiatry, but at that moment I was already beginning to have, doubts and second thoughts, but I hung in there. But she was trying to tell me something. I think what she was saying was she had been in the hospital for years, and she longed for, connection, and we all long for connection.
Yeah. We forget something very important, and this is more valuable, I think, for medical professionals, the sense of belonging to a community, to a circle of friends, to a family, to something that inspires us, to something that connects with us. And not many people have this. And I think once they realize and they solve this issue, they get much better. And this is one of the things that I want to ask you, personally, what do you think are the traits, the habits, the routines that you have in your life that got you to this point in your career and made you this successful in what you're doing?
I'll just throw out some terms like conviction, um, order, dedication, um, inquisitiveness, a relentless inquisitiveness. Um, I research everything that I'm interested in, um, which is not necessarily great because it leaves some things aside. But those are some of the ways that I would describe, that I am. A little also. I'm introverted. Um, and one of my most recent essays that hasn't even been published was kind of like I was doing research on whether introverts can make good medical leaders. So, and the answer is yes, but we won't get into that. But you don't have to be that taken for granted, extroverted, charismatic person. But so I'm a little bit on the introverted side because I absorb things like a sponge, and so I have four children, so I've told you about my son, my youngest, and then I have three girls, and my youngest daughter, who is a mental health therapist, is a lot like me. She's very observant and she takes it in. She tends to be on the introverted side. And we were having a discussion about autism spectrum disorder. And she said to me, Dad, if you took there's a rating scale for autism. It's very famous. I'm blocking on the name. She said, I bet you if you took that rating scale, you'd come out on the spectrum. And I had a Bruce Willis moment, the Sixth Sense at the end of the movie when he realizes he's dead. I said, no, can't, I never thought of it. Of course, I researched, autism to death after that comment, because I'm not a child psychiatrist. I mean, I know quite a bit about autism, but I'm not a child psychiatrist. And, I had some of the DSM-5 features, but I think a lot of physicians do. And so, they tend to be, a little indifferent, maybe even awkward at times. Their communication, patterns aren't perceived as being totally normal. I mean, you can look up the DSM-5 criteria, but then I discovered there's a whole society or organization of physicians with autism spectrum disorder based out of England, I think, somewhere in the UK. So then, which led me to the finality that I wouldn't call myself autistic, but I am neurodiverse. That's the preferred term, but it serves me well. And when you think about it, and when you read and look at some of the, criteria for ASD, you'll see that it could really serve physicians in a good way.
Yeah.
But anyway, I'll leave it there. So a little bit of neurodiversity, I don't think hurts.
So if you have all these years in your back and your experience and things that happen to you, your failures, your step backs, your successes, with the wisdom that you have right now, if you look back to your own self when you were young and when you started this, what kind of advice would you give to yourself?
Oh, the first thing that comes to my mind would be to speak out more. So this is where I don't recommend the introversion. Speak out on your behalf. Don't, it's okay to absorb and observe and, think about things and have opinions, but you've got to speak out on your behalf and on behalf of others when you see injustices. When I left medicine, in practice and went into industry, I was afraid to speak out because I had, my wife and four children that I had to raise. And I was afraid that if I was too outspoken, especially in a political way, that I might lose my job. And I didn't want that, I wanted job security, So the irony is a good place to kind of leave it. I mean, we can go on forever, but if you wanted to bring to a close, this is very fitting that the irony is now I kind of work more in a consulting capacity. I feel like I'm my own person. So after a long career, I finally feel where I am now. I feel very free to speak out. I don't
You have
fear
nothing to lose
retribution.
anymore.
What's that?
You have nothing to lose anymore.
Nothing to lose. I don't fear retribution. Nothing. Yeah, and I wished I had approached life a little bit more with that philosophy.
I
It's
see.
not a regret. It's just an answer to your question that you should speak out more for yourself and for
Yeah,
others.
I think that's a great advice. There are a lot of people out there that they don't speak out, and then they blame others or themselves or situations, and they don't take action with the things that they actually wanted to do or wanted to say. And I agree. I mean, even if you have something to lose, I think it's very important to let your opinion out there, and that's what the free society is about, right? Finally, I mean, if we suppress ourselves or if we suppress others to speak up, that's a big issue. And I don't want to get into political aspect of it, but because I come from a communist country, and that's what happened to me until I was 28 years old.
Mm.
And the whole principle of that kind of society is to suppress people to speak up and say their opinions about things. There's only one way right, and everybody needs to do the same thing. So yeah, I agree with you. That's the basic of a free society.
It's better to lose your
Lazarus,
job. It's better to lose your job than to lose your soul.
that's very well said. And at the end, that's all we have, right? We have our soul till the end. The jobs can come and go. It's been a pleasure having you. How can everybody else get in touch with you, learn more about your work, your writings? What's the best way?
The two quick ways, if they want to learn more about my writings, just Google my name, or not, don't Google, you can Google it, but go to Amazon and look up my author page under Arthur Lazarus. You'll see some of the books I've written, with a few more coming out in 2025. Or just email me, artlazarus6, number 6, artlazarus6 @gmail.com.
Perfect. I actually encourage everyone to look into your work. It's fantastic, and I think it's a lot of wisdom to be taken from that. So, with that said, I appreciate you being here, and hopefully, people will learn more about your work. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate you, and I very sincerely thank you for inviting me on your podcast.
Absolutely.
That's a wrap on Stellar Success, Leveling Up for Medical Pros with Dr. Tudor Francu. Interested in joining us? Go to stellarsuccesspodcast.com/guest to apply. Stay stellar and level up.